Hi there, my name's Kristen Roskis and I work with the marketing team at Liturgical Press. Today I had the great pleasure of sitting down with Samuel Torvend to talk about his new book, Jesus in Nature, a Monastic Christology. Samuel Torvend joins us from the Puget Sound area of Washington State. He is a priest, an emeritus professor of religion, and a Benedictine oblate of St. John's Abbey. He's a member of the Ecology and Liturgy Seminar of the North American Academy of Liturgy, and the author of two other Liturgical Press books, Still Hungry at the Feast and Monastic Ecological Wisdom. So without further ado, here's our conversation. Do you want to first start by telling us a little bit about yourself? Not to spoil it, but I know you're an oblate of the St. John's Abbey. So how does that inform your life and your writing? And maybe talk a little bit about your interest in ecology and spirituality and where that kind of came along in your whole journey to becoming an oblate.
I think the first thing I'd say is I'm a bivocational priest. So for a good period of time, I taught liturgy in two Midwestern Catholic seminaries, one in St. Paul, the other in St. Louis. And then when I returned to the West Coast, I was born here. I taught part-time at Seattle University, the Jesuit school, and then for 28 years taught undergraduates church history at Pacific Lutheran University. As an oblate of St. John's, I would say my life has been shaped by praying the Liturgy of the Hours, by studying, teaching. I teach courses in medieval history and monastic history, and publishing on the rule and its wisdom for us today. I was a student in the St. John's School of Theology in the late 70s. That's all I'll say about that in terms of dating. But I have enormous affection and gratitude for what I received while studying at Collegeville and then in Jerusalem with Father Luke Steiner. It was at Collegeville that I was introduced to Virgil Michael, who was the founder of the Liturgical Press, the founder of Worship Magazine. And what I found so attractive in him, he's really become my hero throughout my life. What I found so attractive in him was that he saw clearly the relationship between the Mass and social action in the world. And that social action focused on, during the Great Depression, on farmers who are impoverished, but also because he participated in the emerging Catholic Rural Life Conference on the land and conservation of the land as well. So that to me, that was kind of an important influence in my life. I do think, though, that my interest in ecology and spirituality really began with my parents, who were master gardeners, and my grandparents, who were Oregon farmers, who were really concerned about conservation of land and water sources. So today I live in Western Washington, close to the Puget Sound, and uh, we're very proud. We delight in the beauty of the region, the mountains, the forests, the deep bays, the great diversity of animal life here. But we also recognize that there's been much wounding of the area due to 19th century and 20th century mining, clear cutting of forests, manufacturing, and pollution in land and in water. Our electricity comes from hydroelectricity, so we're dependent on glaciers in the range that produce water. But guess what? Those glaciers are now melting. And so in their melting, that risks decreased electricity for us. So because of that, I think we're acutely aware here of for those of us who are Christian, are aware of the relationship between ecology and spirituality. I would say those are the kind of the primary influences um, in my life, as well as teaching courses on the theology of nature and participating in groups that are committed, Christian groups that are committed to caring for the creation.
Yeah. That kind of just made me want to ask this additional question. It sounds like you do a lot of liturgy studies and teaching. How do you see liturgy relating to ecology?
I would say, the heart of Catholic life is a sacramental life. And you can't have sacraments without the gifts of the earth. So, water, olive oil, bread, wine, trees, as in Christmas trees, palm branches that are turned into ash, the great fire at the great vigil, the beeswax of the paschal candle, all those things that we might take for granted, we might not see them as the gifts of the earth. And then the question is, how are we caring for the earth so that we can continue to enjoy those gifts, which we say very clearly communicate the presence of God to us?
So you wrote Monastic Ecological Wisdom for Liturgical Press, which we published back in 2023. Can you tell us a little bit about that book for those who haven't read it and how this new volume, Jesus in Nature, flows from that one?
In 2015, UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, received an application from the state of Italy asking UNESCO to make 10 Benedictine monastic sites in Italy World Heritage Sites. And so I read through that, and the Italians said, one of the things we think is exceptional about these Benedictine sites is that they lived in great harmony with the land in which they were founded. And that's a model for our living in harmony with the land today. But they didn't give any evidence of that, at least in what I could read. So I thought, oh, well, is that so? Is that really actually true? And that led to research in Italy at many of those Benedictine sites, but also in the literature from that period to kind of get at that. So, monastic ecological wisdom really focuses on Benedict in the natural world, something that had not been done before, placing him within the natural world, how he interacted with the natural world, how the rule gives hints about engagement with the natural world, how the liturgy of the hours for him was governed by the sun and the moon and the natural seasons of the year, not by government, not by the market, but by the natural seasons of the year. And then what were the how did monastic stewardship of the land emerge in the early medieval period? And finally, then, in that, I offered from that monastic study um, guides for contemporary Catholics and other Christians on how we might receive this gift from the early monastic world and learn from it in our own care for the earth today.
The first part of this new book, Jesus in Nature, is about the ecology of where Jesus lived and ministered, which I thought was very interesting. This kind of seemed like an unexplored idea, at least from what I know. So, what got you interested in this, and why do you think it's important for today's readers and believers?
Well, when I was a kid, when I was a child at the dining room table, if I had a question, my mother and my father would say, the World Book Encyclopedia is right over there. Why don't you go look that up and come back and give us a little report? So, in one sense, I've been a researcher since I was about 10. And so, investigating something that is new to me is always really kind of exciting for me. I want to do that. And so, that kind of investigation has been really important to me. And so to delve into the ecology of Jesus' homeland, what he actually encountered, not a lot has been written about that. And of course, not a lot has been written about that because I think uh, in much of our tradition, we have simply focused on human beings and what salvation means for human beings, right? And we haven't paid much attention to actually the context in which Jesus lived in the natural world and how he had an intimate knowledge of the natural world and how you could uncover, right? That's the point of that chapter, to uncover what he experienced, how he used the natural world in his teaching, how he used elements of the natural world in his actions. So to me, it was just fun to do that research and find out that there are three different kinds of fishing nets, right? That would have been used in the Sea of Galilee when he was alive, or
Mhm.
what was the terrain like, and how did the terrain or affect the way in which he was raised, for instance. So all of that was kind of very interesting to me to say, and here's the point: are we paying attention to our own natural ecology? Do I know where I live well? Does the reader know where they live well, their natural world, whatever part of the natural world it is that they live in? It's kind of an important piece.
I'm excited for people to read that because I think it's just fun. In the book, there is some mention of gardening as a way that monastics have related to creation for a long time. We're in the middle of kind of peak gardening season right now. Can you talk a little bit about the spirituality of gardening, maybe for monastics, maybe for other people? Do you use it as a spiritual practice yourself? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, in my spiritual practice, mine is not the best spiritual practice, but I'll get to that in a second. The thing that I discovered in researching monastic gardens is the very different kinds of gardens. So there would be a vegetable garden. Benedict says there should be a garden, and ideally it should be within the walls, the enclosure of the monastery. Well, most of the time it was outside, of the monastery, but very close to it. So a vegetable garden, flower garden, but mostly flowers that have medicinal purposes. An herbal garden for herbal medicine, because monastic communities for about 500 years, maybe 1,000 years, were the only healthcare presence alive in the medieval world, with lots of experimentation going on. There was the cloister garden, which was intended to be a place of peace in which one could come and simply meditate or pray or reflect on the world in which one lived. And then this notion that monks and nuns who were working in the gardens were like the new Adam and Eve. They were restoring paradise. So, not far from us in British Columbia, we have the Bouchard Gardens, which are these stunning gardens you can walk through. And I remember the first time I was walking with my parents, and my mother said, Eden must have looked like this. So these different types of gardens, I think, to me, are really interesting. So for me, we lavender grows very nicely where we live. So I'm out most of the time caring for the lavender that's growing in the backyard, and giving thanks for the incredible, beautiful purple that's in the lavender. We have English lavender and American lavender. And those are two very different kinds of lavender, but the colors in them are so stunning. And of course, bees are drawn to lavender. So it's a very bee-friendly kind of plant. And given the loss of bee species, it's important, I think, to have as many kinds of plants you have that can actually be of benefit to birds, to bees, to other insects, because we're all part of one web, one interrelated web. Yeah.
So I think the book has the potential to reach many different audiences. It's obviously appealing to those interested in Christology or ecology, maybe also liturgy. But I also think it might have something for more science interested people. So why do you think those more science minded people might want to dive into the book?
Everything that's alive is an energy event, right? And energy never goes away. But for Hildegard of Bingen, who had a scientific mind, she could easily agree with that notion that everything's an energy event from a scientific perspective. But she would say we know the name of that energy event, and it is the greening power of God alive in the world. Her notion of viriditas, right? That greening power is the energy that holds everything together. And for us, the question is, in our living, will we be channels of that really strong, good greening energy? Or as she says, will we block it because of our selfishness and our self-interest, what she calls our drying up or our withering? Because she has this interesting notion what Jesus brings is moisture and wetness to people who are dried up. That's how she understands sin, right? It's being dried up, getting brittle and hard. Whereas Walafrid, he's the great gardener, and he says he's kind of critical of the monks who just want to stay in the scriptorium and keep their hands nice and clean. He says, you should not be ashamed and you should not fear and you should not avoid getting your hands dirty in the soil, including spreading dung all over it, right? So he has this very down to earth view. He says, get out there and get into the natural world. Just don't sit inside, huh? But then he has these marvelous images drawn from the floral world of Jesus and of Mary, which in one sense become all those incredible Christmas carols that we know about. Lo, how a rose e'er blooming. He does that. Whereas the Venerable Bede, he's fascinated by light and the image of light, especially at springtime, because for him, the new year was always in March, the beginning of spring. And consequently, for him, he talks about how the coming of Christ, in terms of his resurrection, is, the flourishing of light and how we're drawn to we're all drawn to the light, right? We need light in order to live. So he also crosses this book of nature, book of scripture stuff and brings the two of them together, the same as Walafrid, the same as Hildegard. They're both, all of them are well versed in the Bible and in the natural world, and they see the two coming together. So I kind of hope that's another thing people kind of can get excited about. Do I know the natural world as well as I know the Bible, or do I need to know the Bible more than I know the natural world? Those two.
Lastly, what are you hoping readers will learn from your book, and what do you hope that they put into practice?
I think I mentioned this earlier. I and many others are raised with the notion that the primary way in which you read the Bible in the Christian tradition is really with an anthropocentric lens. It's about human beings alone. God sent Jesus to save human beings, period. And I don't doubt that, but there's more. And so I'm hoping readers will begin to put on an ecological lens and begin to see the natural world in the Bible, in the Christian tradition, in the lectionary readings they hear at Mass, in the Psalms that are prayed in the Liturgy of the Hours, so that they begin to see the incredible diversity and beauty of the world that is God's first gift of grace, which is the creation. And so to give thanks for that can expand our understanding of life in this world, a very sacramental thing to do, that God comes to us through the natural world. That's one of the ways in which God comes to us. But I think the second thing is to actually expand one's notion of who Jesus Christ is. Because on the one hand, in the book, you see there's a great emphasis on his humanity and as a human being, his interaction with the natural world. But he is also, I would say, in his risen state, the cosmic Christ. So the cover of the book, which I just love the cover of the book, it's the Word of God, Jesus Christ, the Logos, who's creating flowers and the first creation. So this is holding together Jesus, the human being, ensconced in the natural world, and at the same time, the cosmic Christ, who is the agent of creation and is present throughout the entire creation. That's another thing I would like readers to grasp, to widen their understanding of the figure of Jesus Christ, who is at the center of our life and our worship. And then I think a third thing is that his incredible attention to the natural world and the way in which those monastic writers that I refer to in the book, to Benedict, to the Venerable Bede, to Walafrid Strabo, the great Benedictine gardener, and to Hildegard of Bingen, they all come with a different lens uh, as they contemplate the mystery of Jesus in the natural world. So it's really through them that we see a Christ of creation, which has not been a strong suit in our preaching, our teaching, in our hymns, and many times in our own spirituality. So I hope that can expand people's understanding and experience of who he is for us and what he asks us to do in terms of being advocates for a creation that right now is in a lot of trouble.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Liturgical Press's Author Talks. Jesus in Nature, a Monastic Christology, is now available from Liturgical Press. You can learn more and purchase your copy at litpress.org.